managing talent pipelines in a unique way, not just looking after the sort of doing it in a sort of diverse and equitable way, but really looking at how we can manage attracting new talent across sort of the board, across the piece, living in that global village and ensuring that we are kind of smarter and leaner.
Hi, and welcome to Helping People Perform, the podcast that gives you fascinating insights into those people whose chosen vocation is to help others perform at their best. From consultants to teachers, sports coaches to financial advisors, all of my guests share a passion for getting the most out of individuals, teams, and organisations. Enjoy the episode. Hi everyone, and welcome to yet another episode of the Helping People Perform podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by my first tag team. So we've got two people joining us today, all the way from Adelaide in Australia. We have trained organisational psychologist, founding director, and HR and diversity practitioner. We have Tamara Seif, and we have arts management practitioner and counsellor, both of you at Gravitas Consulting Services. We got Michael Bloyce with us as well. So welcome to both of you. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you for having us, Paul.
Fantastic. So we've got a lot to talk about, and there's some great work that you guys are doing, not only at Gravitas, but also in the wider world that you support as well, and some lovely topics to cover off as we go through. But as always, I'd like to start off with a little bit of background about yourselves. What's got you to where you are today?
Lovely. Thanks, Paul. Shall I kick off?
Please do.
All right. Thank you. So, my name is Tamara, as we've said, born in Southeastern Europe, made in London, as I often say. But as of recent, in the past 8 years, I've been residing as well as working in Australia and currently in Adelaide. Some time ago, back in 2014, I was kind of convinced to start my own small company or HR consultancy, a boutique sort of HR and diversity consultancy in 2014 in London, as I've said, Gravitas. So we go by name of Gravitas Consulting Services, and we very much pride ourselves on working with a range of different clients. So anyone from sort of small scale-ups, businesses that are just building their sort of HR kind of functions, if you like, to companies that are going through a lot of changes and need a bit more help. Now, what really got me into this space is starts, I guess, at a point in time when I was 18. When I, at that point in time, I was kind of a young student of languages in a small country that used to be former, or is now known as former Yugoslav region.
Right.
So I was born in Montenegro, very, very sort of small, lovely place, size of Tasmania, for those who may not know where it is, but grew up in central part of the country in Bosnia. And at the age of 17 or 18, as I was studying languages and linguistics, English literature, and German, I wanted to venture out for a couple of years and sort of experience different cultures. Yeah. So I started with Germany and spent a couple of months there as a sort of student. And somewhere along the lines, in early 90s, I then thought, places like London and England are calling me. I think I may want to spend about a year there and take a year out of uni.
Right.
So it started as simple as that. Quite young, quite inexperienced, had English language under my belt, but that was about it.
Right.
And some 2 years into living in London, the civil war broke out in Bosnia. So I kind of found myself in a completely kind of new territory. So that was, quite a kind of, quite a big thing, life-changing kind of experience.
Indeed.
I've absolutely loved my new homeland. And very early on, I got as part of that kind of first journey, living in a melting pot, multicultural pot. I started kind of developing and strengthening my relationships, professional and personal, with people from different backgrounds. Right. There was something really inside that was always kind of there, wanting to kind of experience that, learn about challenges and opportunities that other people and communities were facing. And that is, I think, where that first thirst for that social justice, human rights, and diversity and equity space kind of came about. All these experiences really, really, shaped me enormously as a person, as a human, as a practitioner.
Yeah.
And I worked with a number of organizations. One of my last sort of roles, actually, prior to coming to Australia, which was quite sort of game changing, as it resulted in me sort of subsequently founding Gravitas, was working for Waltham Forest Council as their first diversity, equity, and inclusion sort of manager. Combining that with some policy development. So I spent about 3.5 years working with wonderful teams, learning a lot and developing myself. But there's been a lot of changes and restructure. And at that point, some of my sort of later-to-be clients said, well, now may be a really good time for you to try and venture out, and see, how do you feel about being a consultant? I went, oh, what is that? I'm not entirely sure. It just sounds really scary. So I had an opportunity to sort of tender for a piece of work, which literally sort of was how this journey started. And that was putting myself sort of to work as a support person in the working with the team that were kind of part of Centre of Excellence in Skybridge Broadcasting. And they needed someone who can help them with a bit of change management projects. So that was a 3 or 4 month tender. And was very successful and resulted in me actually forming a company. Nice. And the rest is history, really. Came to Australia sometime in end of 2013 or 14. And in 2015, I've met my husband and now business partner, Michael. And kind of who's kind of working a lot in the counselling space.
Right.
So in Australia, I've had an opportunity to work with a number of wonderful organisations too.
Nice.
So that's kind of where I am, or
fantastic.
Where I got to.
Fascinating. And what about yourself, Michael? What's your background? Because with those two bits, we got the arts management and counsellor. That's potentially two different fields there. Tell me a bit more about that background.
And look, I spent a lot of time working in the arts. Virtually all my life, I've been involved in music or theatre or management of those sort of things, managing venues, doing theatre programming, managing libraries, events, even showgrounds along the way. So a bit of a jack of all trades in that respect. But then, as often happens, I had a relationship breakdown, and that sort of led to the development of a parallel career in counselling, particularly in counselling folk with what they call cluster B personalities, or dealing with cluster B personality, so narcissism and histrionic behaviour, paranoid behaviour, this sort of thing.
Wow.
And that's of great interest to me, particularly in this topic, helping people perform. Along the way, I spent also 20 years involved in politics, and we won't go into that. That's,
well, if you're studying narcissists, it must be a target-rich environment, I would have thought.
Well, it is. That's the point. And then for a short time, I was involved in education and academia, teaching event management at a local college here. So put all that together, I've had a very heavy involvement in arts, politics, academia, and business. And I'm here to tell you all those areas where narcissism thrives.
Right.
And toxic relationships are to the fore.
Right.
And so, yes, I've absolutely worked in that space, and I can understand thoroughly people who are challenged working in relationships that they simply can't work out.
Right.
And that's a lot of my work these days, sorting people out and telling them, really explaining to them what they're dealing with.
Right.
Because all they know is that life has become hell, and it's very difficult to work, and it's very difficult to flourish and perform in those circumstances.
Wow. A couple of fantastically interesting stories and really varied. Maybe that leads us on then in terms of what you do now in terms of Gravitas. Who do you help? How do you help them? And how does this dual relationship piece work and fit in with that?
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. I'm sorry, I was actually sort of about to say. So, in terms of that kind of helping people perform scope and gravitas and the side of work, I guess I'm in, that's very much focused around helping organizations understand, how the dichotomy between blending sort of the business needs and ensuring that that wellness and well-being, and people that are in organizations sort of, well blend together and thrive together.
Yeah.
So from my point of view, as Gravitas will help organizations ensure that their teams are not only high performing, but can actually, to their best, sort of really learn how to function well as cross-functional teams.
Right.
So, we know that organizations that are very sort of, that are really truly diverse, whether it's, gender equity and diversity or any aspect of diversity, really do extremely well and excel well. Retention is better. Everything's better, really. The employee experience, this is another area that is very, very relevant in terms of how we help people perform better and be the best versions of themselves, or the optimal versions, as I like to prefer to sort of look at. So one of the areas that I was going to mention today is in one of the areas that has just come about fairly recently, and that is supporting sort of women, senior leaders or women, female leaders, in proactively managing menopause in the workplace.
Right.
So Gravitas would come in and work with anyone from C-suite leaders to sort of senior managers, new kind of and emerging leaders, and across the organization, to really ensure that people, understand what this type of change means, how they can ensure that they can best support sort of women at any kind of stage of that journey, whether it's early menopause, perimenopause, going through transition, or having just gone through menopause, and really ensuring that it's kind of normalized. We know, and I won't go into this too much, but there's been some controversial sort of things happening actually, even in UK as well as in Australia. There were some sort of, we were hoping diversity practitioners serious talks in getting menopause really sort of, getting that into the legislation and passing through the Equalities Act. That didn't happen. There wasn't enough support. So a lot of us are kind of quite disappointed at this point in time. But like with everything, we hope that these things will come at some point sort of soon, and everything is just part of a change. So these are some of these sort of areas where we can sort of certainly help, and love working with sort of organizations as well as teams. Another area, just sort of to finish off, would be, and I do get a lot of sort of calls, as well as starting to really think about that, is how can we, practitioners like myself and advocates, help organizations better understand as to how they can best embed the new HR, new operating model, so future of the workforce. So how can we kind of help organizations and help them kind of anything from implementations, rollout of their diversity, equity, and inclusion strategies and business planning, and blend that into better workforce planning, given that a lot of things are going to move and are moving already towards artificial intelligence and this kind of, automating sort of things. And final area where we can absolutely help, and I feel very passionate about, is that talent pipeline. Managing talent pipelines in a unique way, not just looking after the sort of doing it in a sort of diverse and equitable way, but really looking at how we can manage attracting new talent across sort of the board, across the piece, living in that global village, and ensuring that we are kind of smarter and leaner, and we really work with organizations to manage those challenges. So these are kind of some of the examples.
Wow. I mean, three massive topics there, and I know from personal experience and what I would term, a lack of experience in a lot of ways. Certainly, menopause in the workplace. I don't think at any point in my career has that even been a conversation. I think there's a lot of conversation, a lot of education to be had in that field. future of work, and there's there's huge changes going on as we speak in that space, and I think there's going to be a lot of support required. And talent is and attracting the right talent is it's one of the areas that I've got a few little projects that I'm supporting on, and getting the right people and keeping the right people in organisations is a real challenge across the globe at the moment. Michael, where do you fit in all of this?
Well, I fit in the other part of the equation, which is wellness.
Right.
You'll appreciate that wellness, means that you must be healthy both physically, emotionally, and mentally. And the trouble is, these days there are so many troubles in workplace relationships and so many breakdowns, with toxicity in the workplace, that it's very difficult sometimes for people to perform at their highest level when they're facing those sort of challenges. And I think, if you look at it, step back and look at the world for the last several decades, there's been a trend more and more away from issues like or concepts of community and society as a whole to a greater focus on the individual.
Right.
And you can see that in many different ways, Paul. I think, the concept of community groups struggling for membership and struggling for people to actually come and help and perform some community service. That's sort of broken down markedly over the years, to the point that some groups are in jeopardy of continued existence even.
Yep.
They can't get people to volunteer. And so you see it even in urban design, new housing estates, and the first thing that happens is big walls go up so that you can't interact very successfully with your neighbours.
Right.
And there's no space on the block for leisure. It's all becomes house and a statement about your status. A lot of people are more concerned about status these days than just about anything else.
Right.
You see it. Well, that's it. You see it in the explosion, I think, of social media. Particularly the Facebooks and the Instagrams and the TikToks, which are all screaming, look at me, look at me. And it's all very individual focused again. And, the tendency is for people to say, well, what's in it for me when they look at the workplace, and how can I get ahead, and to hell with, anything else. So a lot of these things go together and have created what I believe is really an epidemic. Not to forget that other epidemic.
Yeah.
This is the real problem, the epidemic of toxic relationships in the workplace, and the difficulties people have in working with those people, and how their own performance becomes compromised because of that.
Yeah, and I was reflecting with someone the other day. It's amazing how, from my completely uneducated perspective, should we say, and a non-professional perspective, what I see is a lot of those personality types are the ones who are rising to the top.
Yes, well, that's absolutely it.
Yeah.
Many leaders are, unfortunately, of that ilk. And what we're seeing in the counselling field, of course, is a great need for employee assistance program counselling, EAP counselling, for people that are badly affected by that. And you perhaps also see it too in the explosion of life coaching. People looking for solutions in terms of how do I get on in the workplace, and how can I, stand a chance of rising to the top against, all this competition from these overwhelming narcissistic people. And so, yes, life coaching has become a very big part of general counselling now.
Yeah. Oh, some fascinating stuff. And I just want to touch on a couple of other things. So I know in previous conversations that we've had, you've mentioned other work you do with the likes of E.ON. Could you just describe that sort of side of it in terms of what you're doing there?
So there's a number of organisations that I also partner with, but also I've been very humbled and really grateful for the opportunity to have worked with some amazing organisations in the past 7 years. So E.ON stands for the Equal Employment Opportunity Network. They started about 30 years ago, and started out as a sort of small not-for-profit in Melbourne. They're a Victorian-based organisation, and in the 7 years that I've been with them. I started off as the committee member, just looking after some of their events, management, supporting and facilitating, and then been asked to sort of sit on the board advisory 2 or 3 years later, which was wonderful. I've just actually recently sort of stepped down from that role and have given the floor to, other voices. But, basically at that point in time, about 7 years ago, was mainly sort of just a smaller network, if you like, of practitioners, educators, rights activists, social justice activists, from all sort of walks of life and organizations across the board, private, public, tertiary, to have, and had a sort of relatively smaller sort of membership base.
Right.
They now have more than sort of 120 members across Australia, as well as sort of some newer members from Asia Pacific, Canada.
Right.
So we've done some amazing work and outreach work. Sorry. I've sort of had some great mentors and coaches that I today also work with, and developed relationships with sort of President to be on, Roman Rozbatsky, that I'm sort of hoping to kind of introduce, and always love to introduce. He's actually one of the first male champions of change in Australia.
Right.
And that was it's absolutely amazing. He's a analytical chemist by
Wow.
trade, so very, very interesting. So I've had an opportunity to work with a sort of number of organizations, as well as cultural synergies. That are also sort of global organizations that do anything from executive coaching to cross-cultural coaching. So certainly sort of that pro bono element is very, very important to me, and I'm hoping that that will extend in the future.
Yeah.
And more recently, I've been asked, which was very nice, to contribute to SDIG. It's Systemic Inclusion Global sort of network. It's a platform, basically a digital platform, enabling D&I professionals across the globe to really sort of share some great stories, problem solve together, and really use that platform to support others in learning, coming up with kind of new things and challenges within profession. So yeah.
Fantastic, and as always, I'll make sure that links to these organisations and the websites and things that are definitely in the show notes, because I'm sure there's going to be some listeners who want to find out a bit more about those organisations, maybe get involved, and I think that's some fantastic stuff.
They are growing, always looking for new people to join, always looking for sort of new fresh voices and contributions. Absolutely, they'd be delighted. Yeah.
Brilliant. And you touched upon one thing there that maybe takes us nicely into this next section of the interview, the chat, is how do you help your own performance? Who do you go to? What inspires you to perform better in your own fields?
Yes. Well, look, that kind of thing. It's for me, it's always kind of ensuring that I try and sort of get out of my, as they say, stretch your zone, comfort zone as much as possible. So it's kind of that learning or self-coaching, so now we've got that principle of self-coaching. I, obviously try and sort of, stay abreast in sort of different ways by getting involved in sort of, in terms of in various activities or programs to stay abreast of what's going on in the profession. But I also, and I am actually, at the moment, I'm sort of talking to a number of sort of different individuals and organizations where I hope that I would be getting, if you like, a different coach at this point in time as well.
And what about yourself, Michael? How do you help yourself perform?
I think, look, it's important, whatever situation you're in and whoever you are, to look for mentors.
Yeah.
And, that's very important. And I've had 2 or 3 really good sort of mentors in my life, and I've relied heavily on them and the messages they taught me, pretty early in life. So that's vitally important. If I was to sort of mention a couple in the field we've been talking about, though, I think there's a bloke who actually was born in Britain, now living in Melbourne, called Jeremy Scrivens. And it's interesting that he and I are both former cathedral choristers, but Jeremy works as director of the emotional economy at work. That's what his firm is called. And he's very much a futurist and a consultant on the notion of how collaboration in a digital world should happen in workplaces, and where's the social good, and where does that fit into the workplace? So his work is very much aligned to this topic, and it's complemented by the sort of work I do, I think, in terms of the personalities involved. But so he's one good example, I think, in this particular field. And the other one I'd point to is Jordan Peterson, the Canadian psychologist and author, and he wrote that book, of course, 12 Rules for Life.
Right.
And very, in some respects, quite controversial. He describes himself as a classic British liberal and a traditionalist, which is maybe why I like him. But
just maybe.
But
Yes.
the rules, and if you've read the book, you'll understand it. But I mean, one of those rules is to treat yourself like someone you're responsible for helping.
Right.
So it's about that love for others and the want to sort of instill that in others around you in the workplace, perhaps, and to love yourself in the process too, certainly.
Right.
But yeah, they're good examples, I think, of people that have a lot to offer and a lot to mentor in this field of helping others at work.
Yeah. I mean, it's a common answer that comes up in that section in terms of mentor, not only coaches, but the mentor side. And a lot of the conversations I've had with people who don't necessarily have a mentor are that they don't see the value that they're bringing to the relationship as a mentee. Any tips or experiences that you'd share from that side in terms of why is it a positive piece for the mentor as well as the mentee?
I think the answer is simply that you can learn something from everybody. And, if I went to another rule of Jordan Peterson's, it's the one that says, assume the person you're listening to may know something you don't.
Right.
And that really says it. If you're a better listener, if you can become a better listener and listen, keep your mouth shut when necessary and absolutely take in what others are saying, you'll go ahead in leaps and bounds. We don't know everything about everything, and you can learn so much just by being quieter sometimes and taking on board what others are teaching, essentially. People themselves are great teachers because we've all learned something along the way in different respects. And as I say, if you're prepared to understand that and take on board different things from different people, become a much more rounded individual too.
That's really great. I was just going to actually add to that, but also previous to that, sorry, as you were talking about, people that had real impact on your development and your thinking. For me, just thinking and putting that into context of people's performance and leaders and leading with humility, empathy, and achieving good impact is, Daniel Goleman. Been absolutely, for a lot of people is Drucker. For me, Daniel Goleman is a Drucker of sort of, kind of management. So that Daniel Goleman is the father of EQ, emotional sort of intelligence. And it is really that emotional intelligence that, aspects that I'd always bring in my own work and working with others and ensuring that, sort of organizations are really sort of developing, evolving, and that teams kind of work well. And going back onto what Michael was talking about, mentoring and mentees, absolutely. I've had an opportunity to work with Australian HR Institute a couple of years back whilst we lived in Melbourne. And in particular, I've had a wonderful opportunity to work with 2 or 3 international students. They were all from sort of, different parts of the globe, different challenges. And in that mentor conversation, I always wanted to ensure that I've taken that active listening approach, but also intersectionally, because it is it's often, it's a challenge to really kind of, as you're listening, to take in different aspects of an individual and human and try and kind of put it up in some of different parts. So take that holistic approach.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Oh, wonderful. I know from my own experience as well, when I have been a mentor to some people, it's huge. I find the whole process massively valuable to me in terms of cementing a lot of my learnings, really challenging my own self as well. It's just like, that's the way I did it at the time? Is that really the best way? Maybe there's some other options, and it does open you up. So I'd encourage everybody out there, anybody listening, seek out those mentor relationships. And don't forget that the mentor gets as much out of that relationship as the mentee. So yeah, brilliant.
Absolutely.
Couple of sort of slightly different questions now, in terms of, if you had the opportunity to work with any individual team or organisation that you could bring your own skill set to, that you could help perform in some way, who would you want that to be?
Do you want to go first?
It's easy. It's easy for me, because I would just say anybody who is affected by toxic relationships,
Right.
and particularly in the workplace. Usually, as I said, people don't know exactly what they're dealing with. They just know that life is difficult.
Right.
And they can't quite work out what's going on. So we're very, very interested in helping anybody in that space. And there's a contact form on our website they can fill in and make touch, and very happy then to set up sessions and provide that advice as to, perhaps what is going on for them.
Okay.
So very often, when you understand what you're dealing with, life becomes easier.
Yeah.
But people are sort of blindsided by the behaviours.
Right.
And they get very involved in the heat of what's happening, and you simply can't think straight with some of these people. They're so forceful and so overwhelming, and so sure that you're at fault and they're not. It's just becomes very difficult to function easily.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Well, as I say, we'll make sure those links are in there so that people can reach out. What about yourself, Tamara?
Well, look, my list could be sort of as long as my arm, but again, as I've said, sort of very happy to work with organizations that are just at the beginnings of their journey, sort of small scale-up startups, right through to sort of cross-functional teams and across the board. There are a couple of organizations that I would absolutely, if I could turn the clock back, and I'm thinking more actually within sort of your pet or our pet or my expat.
Yeah.
So UK, I would have loved to have had an opportunity. Not that it can't happen now, right? Or in the future, given that I operate sort of globally. CIPD would be wonderful.
Right.
Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, or even as the Equalities Commission, because I truly believe that they may need a helping hand with a couple of great sort of, practitioners and real voices that want to support all that, just, not just pushing through the legislation, but really great practices in terms of some of the things that were mentioned, whether it's menopause in the workplace or something else, Construction and mining, utilities, always very challenging, whether it's sort of in Australia or, New Zealand or globally. So the likes of the BHP would be, or,
Right.
They're already doing some good work, but there's always great things to learn from and also do better.
Right. Oh, wonderful. Yeah, so if there's anybody from those organisations, do reach out. That's what I always say there. And flipping that on its head a little bit then, if you could sit down and have a coffee or a glass of wine or a dinner with any individual or team, who would you want that to be in terms of someone that you believe could help up your own performance and learn from?
We had a bit of a laugh about this one, and I said before I answer, do not, because my table would be too full.
Whereas I'd probably just want to sit down with someone. And, for me, that someone would be Churchill.
Right.
Because, when you're going through hell, keep going. That was his mantra. And he was a person that struggled all his life with depression and adversity and black dog, as he called it. And yet, over a particularly long career in national service, he was able to get through every adversity and come out a winner eventually.
Yeah.
And, along the way, he had to manage and massage a whole stack of different personalities. And he did it very successfully, ultimately, you'd have to say.
Right.
So he'd be someone I'm sure I'd learn a lot from. I don't know that it'd be a coffee. It's probably something strong.
I would imagine so with Churchill, yeah.
And enjoy, things through into the evening, I'm sure.
Fantastic. What about yourself, Tamara?
Well, sorry, I was just going to add onto that sort of adversity journey. We've kind of, shared certain things around the sort of recent event with the Australian Open,
Yep.
and with Novak Djokovic kind of winning his 10th, 10th slam. So it's that piece around sort of adversity and overcoming adversity, which there's a lot to sort of learn from that. My table may be too full. I don't know. My ideal would be having, the Obamas.
Right.
Engine for so Barack Obama, really just his full legacy in terms of what he has attempted to achieve. For me, he was an absolute visionary who has had he really that whole kind of racial equity piece. His lovely wife Michelle Obama, absolutely wonderful, everything, a lot to learn from. People like Simon Sinek, very, very interesting sort of, kind of interesting character in a lot of things in terms of that leadership kind of piece, and kind of coaching. So certainly a lot to learn from. And I just love Brené Brown, but then who doesn't?
Right.
So, my table could be a pretty kind of intersectional and pretty colorful.
Amazing.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be wonderful?
It certainly would be. Well, the final question then, how do people find out more? How do people get in touch? Where are you active?
Yes. So our website currently, we do appreciate it's kind of looking pretty basic at the moment, and we kind of own up to that. That's going to be sort of our focus for the next couple of months. There will be a piece that Michael will be hoping to sort of talk about in a moment, but basically they can go to the website. There is a contact form, certainly can get in touch really easily with us. It's in an email, contact@gravitasconsultingservices.com. That's sort of the best way to find us. At this stage, as I said, so we're plugging in. I mean, we work with a number of partners, particularly, from my end and from Michael's end. We are revamping that, so there'll be kind of some, we'll be merging sort of things, so people will be able to kind of look at, they'll have access to other organizations and companies we work with, and certainly sort of find out about all these lovely organizations we've talked about.
Yeah.
But there is something that Michael was going
to mention
just introduce.
I'm in the midst of a 40,000 word dossier that'll be condensed down into an ebook or 6.
Brilliant.
All different facets of the topic that I've been talking about, and that narcissistic personality and how to deal with it, how to identify it, how to get on with other people.
Well, we'll make sure that all of those contact details are in the show notes and people can get in touch. But a fascinating conversation, so much to cover off in that space. Really love the work that you guys are doing. I think there's a huge future and a lot of support required in a lot of those fields that we've talked about today. So I think you've got yourself a great niche. Keep up the great work, and thanks for being on the show today, Tamara and Michael.
Thank you, Paul.
All right, take care.
Cheers now. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you liked what you heard, then please give the podcast a rate, review and share. I'm Paul Teasdale, and from sausage making to banking, oil and gas to Formula One, I help people perform. If you'd like to find out more and have a conversation, contact me via helpingpeopleperform.com.